Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this evening's Workshop Wednesday Fireside Chat. My name is Aaron Malkin. I'm the Literary Director and Dramaturg at New York Theatre Workshop. Thank you so much for being here with us. To begin, we want to take a moment to hold up the tremendous first-line work that is happening right now for Black Lives Matter and for greater accountability across society, from the police to our own theatrical institutions. We're so pleased to have our 2050 Literary Fellow, Janine Harris, and Executive Fellow, Declan Zhang, moderate the conversation with this amazing panel, Reflections of the Recession, with Jonathan McCrory, Stephanie Ybarra, and Pirronne Yousefzadeh. The conversation will last around an hour. For the first 45 minutes, Tramane and Declan will moderate a conversation with the panelists. Then we'll open it up to Q&A. If you have a technical or logistical question about the platform, please share via the Q&A if you're on Zoom or via the comments on Facebook, and we'll do the best to take care of all of those. When we get to the Q&A portion, feel free to share your questions for the panel via the same mechanism. If you're on Zoom and someone asks a question that you're interested in, feel free to use the thumbs up to upvote it, and you can use the like feature on Facebook so we can try to get to the questions that are the hottest for you all. I think that's all I have. It is now a great pleasure to introduce Tramane Harris and Declan Zhang.
Hi, everybody. Trey, there he is. And there he goes. And there he is.
Having some technical issues. Hi, everyone. My name is Janine Harris. I'm the Literary Fellow of New York Theatre Workshop. My pronouns are he, him, his.
I'm Declan Zhang. I'm the Executive Fellow at New York Theatre Workshop, and my pronouns are they, them, theirs.
Thank you all for joining us. This chat has been something we, the fellows, have been percolating in our minds about the transitional stage during the pandemic. And we're trying to compare it to the recession in ways how the job market and the economic stability of the country was falling. But we're also trying to morph in the conversation to more direct current events.
We're so pleased to be joined by three amazing panelists. I'm going to read out their bios and then they will pop on. These bios are extensive, so sit with all these amazing accomplishments that these people have had over their lives. Jonathan McCrory is an Obie Award-winning Harlem-based artist who has served as artistic director at National Black Theatre since 2012 under the leadership of CEO Said Lythcott. He has directed numerous professional productions and concerts which include How the Light Gets In, Kluk and Iron John, Dead and Breathing, Hands Up, Last Laugh, and Enter Your Sleep. He has worked at ETW at NYU, at Tisch NYU with Emergence, A Communion, and Evoking Him Baldwin, and at SUNY Purchase directing Exit Strategy, A Beautiful Day in November on the Banks of the Greatest of the Great Lakes. In 2013, he was awarded the Torchbearer Award by theatrical legend Woody King Jr. He is a founding member of the collaborative producing organizations Harlem 9, Black Theater Commons, The Jubilee, Next Generation National Network, and the Movement Theater Company. A Washington, D.C. native, McCrory attended the Duke Ellington School of the Arts and New York University's Tisch School of the Arts. To learn more, visit his website at jonathanmccrory.com. Hi, Jonathan.
Hey, Jonathan.
Our second guest is Stephanie Ybarra, who began her tenure as artistic director of Baltimore Center Stage in 2018 after serving 7 years as director of special artistic projects for the Public Theater in New York. Her career spans over 2 decades and includes roles at Dallas Children's Theater, Dallas Theatre Center, Yale Repertory Theater, Two River Theater Company, and Playwrights Realm. Recent awards and honors include the 2018 Nation Builder Award from the National Black Caucus of State Legislators, as well as being counted among the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts 2019 YBCA 100. She is on faculty at the Juilliard School and serves on the boards of the Make Believe Association and Citizen University. Stephanie holds an MFA from Yale School of Drama. Hi, Stephanie. Our third panelist and final panelist is Pirronne Yousefzadeh, who is a director, writer, and educator, and is the Associate Artistic Director and Director of Engagement at Geva Theatre Center. She has directed and developed work at the Public, at Joe's Pub, Playwrights Horizons, New York Theatre Workshop, Ars Nova, Soho Rep, Atlantic Theatre Company, Mayi Theatre Company, Noor Theatre, the Kennedy Center, Williamstown Theatre Festival, La Jolla Playhouse, Pioneer Theatre Company, Huntington Theatre Company, Two River Theatre Company, Milwaukee Rep, Interact Theatre Company, On the Boards, and Hangar Theatre, where she was a 2006 Drama League Directing Fellow. Indeed, Pirronne is a usual suspect at New York Theater Workshop, member of Ensemble Studio Theater, and an alumna of the Segal Fellowship at Williamstown Theater Festival. Pirronne is a founding member of Maya Directors, a consulting group for artists and organizations engaging with stories from the Middle East and beyond. MFA, Columbia University, member of SDC. Hi, Pirronne.
Thank you all for joining us. This may be a loaded question, but I just want to start off with asking, like, how are all of you doing? I'll start with Jonathan.
So it's one of those today was a very interesting day because I've been realizing that that I stopped like changing like into my work clothes. Like I was just in pajamas all day, every day. And I realized that psychically, that was actually creating a stigma of me feeling locked and trapped and actually not understanding the differentiation between work and home. And so what I tried to do today, it's a totally experimental day, is that I got totally dressed up. I went outside my house. I walked around the neighborhood like I walked to work, and then I walked back into my house. And then before the day is done, I will close my computer. I will walk out of my house, walk counterclockwise, and then I'll come back home. And I'm gonna see if that works. And I know that doesn't really get to the how I'm feeling, but how I'm feeling is that I'm trying to really understand how not to be traumatized by this moment, but get the learnings from this moment. What do I learn about myself in this moment? What does it mean to be in a space of loving myself deeper inside my process? So I think I'm feeling like I'm on the precipice of learning how to love myself, how to get free from my own confines, and lean into the curiosity of my discomfort.
Yeah, truly. That makes me think of how work is so much a part of our lives in some ways, and it's hard to detach it. And I feel the quarantine has definitely, put that question out there in some way, shape, or form. Stephanie.
I am feeling better now that I moved my work situation right next to a window so that I have actual sunlight coming into my space, but I'm very, very tired. I am unbelievably sapped and drained by the moment and by the technology, and I keep waiting for when we get to take a breath, and the breath just never, the pause never comes. And I think it's wearing, it's very wearing. But I think every time I get to sit in a room like this, I derive fuel from that. So I'm grateful.
I just want to say, Stephanie, I have a crystal in front of me, so it absorbs some of that Yes, come on now. We gotta use those mechanisms. Come on, those mechanisms. Yes, those mechanisms. All right, I'm done. I just had to put that out there. Apologies, I'm disrupting.
No, do you? I love it. All right, Pirronne, how are you?
I feel like I've been sort of vacillating between being like bereft, like just totally in despair, incredibly tired, like you were saying, Stephanie, just like weary and sapped, and really angry. And I feel like in the last couple of days, maybe something has shifted in all of that, like that mess of feelings, where I'm also feeling like what's emerging for me is a kind of uncensored honesty, like a level of candor and directness that, like, and I already thought I was like a pretty direct person before all of this, and it feels like some other layer of restraint has just like melted, and I feel like my anger is like channeling now into a level of candor, especially as we see ourselves interrogating our own field, that has been honestly like making me a little giddy, like, and just feeling like a level of, like this, like whatever, like fear of retribution, whatever I was trying to uphold, and like whatever place I was trying to maintain for myself in the thing I was trying to uphold, I feel I'm just sort of like starting to look at that in a way that feels energizing and empowering. So yeah, so it's like a mess of stuff, but some of it's not terrible.
No, that sounds great. I think it really speaks to the moment. I just kind of want to like start this conversation from the beginning. Thank you all for sharing. My first question for you all, focusing on the idea of the recession, where were you at in your career during the start of the recession? Let's work our way backwards from Pirronne up to Jonathan.
I was just starting in a way, because I graduated from Columbia in 2009, and during my thesis year, the thesis year at Columbia, there's no coursework, and apart from directing one's thesis production, you get to like do 2 outside assistantships, or internships, I guess, that are funded by your own tuition dollars. But apart from that, I also like directed a show for my friend's very, very, very small company in Philadelphia. The company no longer exists. And that was like when all of the news was breaking. This was fall of 2008. This was when everything was breaking about the economy crashing. And so by the time I graduated was when I think we were really feeling the effects of that in the field and seeing how that manifested. But it was really just at the start for me.
Mm-hmm.
I was I was almost 10 years into my career, but I had just, similar to Pirronne, I was in graduate school, or I graduated in the spring of 2008. So I got in right under the wire. I slipped into the workforce before everything really got hairy. So in some ways, like, that was the halfway mark to now. But in other ways, it was like a reemergence or a re-beginning of my career as well.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that for me, in 2008, similar to Stephanie, I had just graduated from NYU, and in that time frame, I had this radical idea with a group of friends to start a theater company. So it was really an opportunity of possibility, and that company was the Movement Theater Company, which is still in existence today. And that radical thought and idea is what's actually stayed with me throughout my whole time of just like, abundance is possible. I don't know, it's just really weird. It's just like you said, a recession, when the recession was happening, I was just like, oh yeah, there was a recession, but I was still blazing, right? I was still dreaming. I was still finding out what was possible. And I think that's interesting when we think about even now, when I think about like, there is a possibility that is latent inside of this moment that is quite unique. Quite just, I don't know, you just made me think about that. So I'll stop right there.
No need to stop yourself. No need. My next question was just, what were some industry changes you noticed during the recession? Anybody could go.
So some industry changes. I could take a first dive inside of it. I will say if there were industry changes, it was a conversation around me leaning into the idea that I had to save myself. Like there's notion of, and I think I've been able to revisit that even in the midst of COVID, of just like this notion of, I can't be looking towards an industry to create a blueprint for me. I have to create the reality that I want to seek, because no's are much easier now, because finances are quote unquote, you know what I mean? Or the situations of bleak and black and dire. So like no's are much easier in a climate of a recession, from what can be produced and will be produced. So then there is a question of, so then if everyone's going to say no, what is going to be my yes? And I think the climate that I can remember is a climate where I had to really lean into, what are my values? What do I want to have happen in the world? And what does it mean to like at the time, start a theater company. What does it mean to give birth to and really invest in your own intellectual property versus feeding into the dominant mainstream machine? And how do you do both? And it's not about a no, but it is about a yes and. So how do you create a space that allows for both of those to undulate?
That really resonates because I was in a unique, I can look back now at that moment and see that, oh, attendance was down, or programming choices got a little safer. But I don't remember being super aware of it at the time. I remember, similar to Jonathan, I was so focused on, there's no pathway, there was no blueprint for me either, Jonathan. And like, what do you do with me, who is not a director? I'm not an actor. I'm a producer. What's a producer? What does that mean inside of an institution? Those were questions that back in 2008 that we didn't have answers to, and there weren't very many models for that. So I was very similar to Jonathan, just sort of a little navel gazing, actually, and that's me, not you, Jonathan, but a little navel gazing and just thinking like, oh my gosh, okay, I have put one foot into the workforce out of graduate school. I know what I want, but as important, I know what I want, I know what my values are, but almost more important than that, I know what I don't want. And so somewhere in the, like, not long after all of the things crashed, it's interesting to hear Jonathan reflect on what do you say yes to, because I think that's really valid. And I had the inverse of that. I was so determined to figure out my own path and to figure out how I was not going to get stuck in the no, that I knew what I needed to say no to. And I said no to some serious financial security in that moment. I said no to some serious financial security, and it took a very big leap in the middle of a financial crisis that I had no business doing, because I had no safety net. And it's the best decision I ever made. So it was, as much as knowing what you want to say yes to, knowing what I wanted to say no to, I think really saved my bacon.
And also the clarity of your values. When you talk about that, Stephanie, that clarity of you saying, I knew what my values were in that moment, because then that also brought up for me that I was clear about my values, which made the blueprint much easier.
Yeah, I think I look back on like 12 years ago, me, and I'm like, who is that girl? Like, because I think for me, graduate school, and I think that this is true for directors in a lot of different grad programs, and I just think it's true in terms of what you're saying about like creating a path, like for which there's no real blueprint. Like, a director's path is incredibly varied, and 12 years ago, we were having a very different conversation about racial equity and about empowering BIPOC artists. Like, we weren't even using the term BIPOC, like that hadn't even happened yet. So I think for me, it was like, I was just kind of like, oh, I'm supposed to say yes to everything, and I need a job, and at the time I had loans to pay back, and I had worked for some years before I went into grad school, so I had some relationships, but it is a little bit like a restart after you graduate, right? And I didn't think I wanted to run a company, so I didn't try to do that, which is hilarious to me now. And so I really just wanted to like be a gun for hire, and to work on projects that I believed in. Which was a wider range back then than it is now. It's narrowed a bit. So where I turned to ended up being a lot of academic directing work and a lot of like teaching artist work in regional theaters, actually at Two River. Because as much as theaters were cutting, they weren't cutting education programs, and academic institutions were not cutting like they were maybe cutting the budget and maybe cutting the fee, but they weren't cutting the position altogether. So, so that was a lot of how I started to, as an artist, I don't know, fuse and kind of internalize my training and gain confidence with my training in a way that was less assignment driven like it is in grad school, and was more empowered and autonomous, while also trying to, you know, being able to like pay my rent and pay my loans back.
I want to return to something Jonathan mentioned, which is the possibility and the abundance that is sort of the flip of the coin of such a uncertain, as every email says, time. At the beginning of COVID, obviously the workshop canceled all of its in-person programming for, at the time, 30 days, which sounds so infantile now. How foolish we were. And quickly we had to figure out what we were going to do. And so a number of the fellows were able to jump on the digital programming team, and we put together a whole calendar of events like this one. And one of our original questions that I am asking in this moment, but I'm also going to give it some extra context for the three of you, is how have you adapted to virtual spaces? What have been the challenges and the possibilities and the you know, the frustrating things, and also the beautiful surprises about moving to Zoom, moving to StreamYard and things like that. And what I want to add on top of that question is, now in the midst of what can certainly be described as a global uprising against anti-Blackness, against colonialism, against the effects of slavery, we see, well, the fellows, when all the fellows at the workshop realized that we could do one tangible good thing to help protesters, which was open our lobby and offer those bathrooms as a resource. That sort of exploded into this whole new thing where I feel like in a new way, a lot of the theaters in New York City and around the country are sort of waking up to the fact that, you know, they're a part of the community of the city, and not just the people who come to see the shows and come to do the shows, but also the people who live on that block and the people who walk past it. And like, we're all connected. And I feel like theaters are starting to understand a little bit more now their inherent responsibility to the space that they inhabit and sharing that space. And so the question is both like, what have been the beautiful and challenging and frustrating things about digital spaces and virtual programming, and also like in the moment of nationwide / really global protests, what have you observed theaters waking up to in terms of their responsibility to each other and the world and the people and et cetera?
Yeah. I have to say, I'm going to say something maybe a little controversial. I've really struggled with the virtual programming. I have been, well, I won't say that I found it wholly uninspiring, but I have had a hard time finding my way into it, and into like a version of our art form that exists on Zoom. And I was starting to really try to wrap my mind around it the way we wrap our mind around like the configuration of a venue as a director. Like, why is this play in proscenium? Or why is it in 3/4 thrust? Or why is it, you know, to also ask like, why is it on Zoom? And to look at the form, look at it as a form, extract from it what is useful and what it sets up for success, and then do that, and not try to force a round peg into a square hole in trying to do the material you love on a format that you're settling for, but rather let the form in some ways like speak to you for a moment before determining the material, and letting those two things happen maybe more in a more synchronized way, because it is a new form for us. And and also like giving ourselves permission not to be experts in it, you know, like and letting ourselves say we're beginners at this, I think has been really liberating for me after getting over my original grumpiness about doing things on Zoom. Was just to say, like, we're a student of Zoom now, and we have to like treat it that way and treat this like a series of experiments. And then, and maybe by the time we can actually gather in a theater again, we will have like gotten to something on Zoom that maybe is interesting. But the other, to your other question, I think it's so, I think the Open Your Lobby initiative that New York Theater Workshop started and that many off-Broadway and other theaters in New York are doing, I think is amazing. And I think it's particular to New York and what New York protesters need. And I think that it sparked a conversation about it also happening regionally. It's something that Geva's also sort of figuring out how we can do safely, you know, but I think it's also sparked a conversation about how that may not be the thing that every community and every community needs and that every theater needs to do, but to find your version of how you're supporting the protest, even if the sort of layout of the city that you live in actually, or, you know, the driving culture or whatever doesn't actually really mean that people need that in the same way. And so what I see happening is that we're centering community engagement in this moment in a way that I find really exciting, instead of centering, well, we can't center our work, right? Because we can't do it. And so community engagement can't feel like this accessory thing because it's all we can actually do. And I hope that that serves to revitalize the foundation of the regional theater particularly, because I think that that's where, like, when theaters start to become civic spaces and when they start to become organizations we can count on for more than a pleasurable night in the theater, I think then we're actually going to maybe begin to break down some of the barriers that we've seen that have limited our audiences and who feels welcomed and who feels invested in that organization as a civic space.
Cosign. And I'll add to the civic space piece. Pirronne, I might have a different phrase for it. Like, community engagement feels like, you know, we tend to use that, at least in the theater, as a sort of programming term. This feels like civic engagement. I mean, it's also community engagement, but it actually is also being part of the civic life of a community or of a city or of a town. And when I saw that the workshop had opened its doors, I had actual tears in my eyes. I thought, it's brilliant. And it was very helpful to me personally, as an artistic director in one of the regional theaters. It was helpful to me to be inspired by what had happened at the workshop, and because I didn't think of that, and I don't think that's the way it's supposed to go. I think we look to each other for inspiration and for knowledge, and sort of to share ideas and to iterate those ideas. And so I think Pirronne's actually, you know, absolutely right in that it forced the conversation in my organization too about, like, what is the actual need here? And where we landed was, yes, our version of opening the lobby, which is like opening our steps and socially distant bathrooms. But even the conversation of the gesture of showing up and physically opening our doors. We and my executive director and our senior team, we sort of talked about it. And if nobody walked through the doors, standing there and being available and physically opening the space felt even symbolically correct for this moment. So it was a really useful and inspiring situation. I'll also just add, I haven't been able to find my way into much Zoom programming either. That those moments that I do encounter, I think are utterly delightful, and I'm blown away and not at all surprised when I find myself totally surprised by what our artists are imagining and what they've already been able to wield and conjure with this tool. And the only sort of grumpiness that I feel in this moment is for anybody who wants to categorically say this is not theater. That's the stuff that I really don't have a lot of patience for, that it can be not your kind of storytelling. It can be not a kind of theater that you don't really find your way into, etc. That seems fair. But the thing that it makes me sad when I hear people say that if it looks like this, it is theater, and if it looks like this, it isn't theater. I don't agree. So I'm excited to see where the form takes us and where the platform takes us.
What I'll lend to the conversation, I say yes to everything that's been said so far. I will say, just in addition, I think that this moment, when we talk about what's happening socially and politically and economically, and even when we start even thinking about COVID-19 and the impact that it's had on Black and brown bodies, even before the many deaths and murders and slaughters that have happened of Black and brown lives, and that has gave birth to a very conscious movement that is quite powerful. I will say that there are institutions like NBT who've always been, I will say, have always sought to be, has intended to be, has been very aware of the community in which we serve, very aware of the doors and why those doors are open, why we maintain those doors as a present pulse vibration for the community, and that this is actually a part of our legacy, like a part of our continued work, not a new gesture inside that work. And so the language of fatigue, we're not able to really live inside of. Does that make somewhat sense? That the language of where we're necessary, because we've had, on some level, spiritually, 400 years of this language living inside of us, but for 52 years since Dr. Barbara Antier founded National Black Theater, the premise of it was to create the oasis amidst the burning fire, right? America was burning. Dr. Tier said, I'm creating the oasis. And a Black woman gave birth to a consciousness, a framework, an institution that would then help feed and break the bread to feed more people. And so I think that for me, this moment is a moment to double down, triple down, and get more rooted in the foundation in which you have been gifted to know, the IP, the technology, the pedagogy in which you have been asked to steward. I think that when COVID hit and we were shut down, we took a pause. That pause was a deep centered pause of just being like, how do we not create more noise in this moment? How do we actually contribute to the conversation of this moment? And a lot of it also is about how do we also make sure that we get on the PPP, the EDA, like all of the ways in which I tell most folks that, like, after when the governor shut down the building of National Black Theater with the shutdown, I feel like I became an advocate more than an artistic director. I became a political advocate more than I became an artistic director, because I had to sit in the seat of advocating for the sanctity and the survival and the thrivability of cultural institutions, Black institutions like mine. Making it very clear that the budget might not look good, but we deserve our money, right? And why we deserve our money, and what does it mean to defund not just a theater, but a community center. A center that gives to the heart chakra of really a civilization. And to your point, Stephanie, I think a lot of it is that it is this idea of citizenship, right? This notion of how are we returning the craft back to being great citizens. I was in a conversation with Ngozi, a playwright, and she was basically talking about this moment is a moment to really own our voice as citizens. What does it mean? Like really thinking about, if I'm doing this conversation, if I am creating this work, How is this work helping to evolve the notion of being a better citizen, being a real great caretaker for not only myself, but for the people right or left of me, who might not look like me, have the same cultural background as me, but how do I create this best space to be the best citizen? So I say that, I will say that the real nuance of this moment is intention. The intention of what we do has been amplified. The microscope on what we do has also been intensified, which really creates a real beautiful opportunity to really define where you are and who you are as a human inside of this inside the spectrum called or a human inside the spectrum against this virus called racism, this virus called, with establishment of race, when we did our PSAB training, Stephanie, this virus called race, but then also this virus called capitalism. How do you stand inside that pantheon? And when you sit inside the pantheon of that vibration that goes as long as past 400 years, right? 400 years of slavery on this country, but past those 400 years, what does it mean for you, and where do you sit inside of it, and what is your birthright? You were birthed into a lot of this. You didn't create it, but you were birthed into it. So then how do you own that? And I will say lastly, Sade Lithcott, the CEO of MBT, said something to me, and I say this almost in every Zoom because it's that powerful for me, and it's been the shaping tool for me, is that she said something in a conversation that has radically shifted my notion of what I need to do in this moment. She said, what if the pause is an opportunity for Black bodies not to labor anymore on soil that they were ripped to become the labor force for, right? What does it mean for the Black body to just sit back and witness? What does it mean for the Black body to own itself as far as it doesn't have to produce nothing for none of y'all, right? But only for itself. What does that mean? How does that conversation come into play? And can that be honored as a part of our contribution? And so then that's where a deeper pause happens of like, where do I say yes? Where do I say no? Where do I center my own self, my self-being, my self-worth inside of a conversation where I'm also being asked to produce in order to save? I have to generate the income to save an institution I love. But at the same time, I'm having the opportunity to have a conversation that I need, which is, what is my value? And how does my value contribute to being the best citizen for not only myself, but for the people around me?
Wow, amen to that and everything said. That definitely, struck a chord with me. Like, now that many places and institutions are waking up to developing anti-racism practices within their institutions, initiatives and petitions like Dear American White Theater, what does that mean next step going forward in theater for artists? How does that affect programming? What are your thoughts on programming now that we're in this age? And the one thing about Open Your Lobby, in a way, is like, a lot of people have been rising to their power through assembly, and it's very interesting to see them even rise up against certain theaters who are not even participating in the conversation in any way, shape, or form. So my main question, to context everything, is what you feel is next for American theater to sort of wipe away its anti-racism practices?
I can go first on that one. I know we found an order, and maybe I shouldn't go first so that order can be dismantled. Stephanie, do you want to go first so that it's dismantled? Because we've been doing, okay, you're like, go ahead. Okay, fine. So, what I will say is that this is a moment for me to take an assessment of how I have done harm to members in my community. How has Jonathan, a Black man, running a cis Black man, running an institution as a gatekeeper, done harm to the people that he says he serves? It's a time for me to be introspective, because if I think about what actually matters to me, it is my neighborhood, it is my community, it is my block. That America is a ripple effect that gets to be fed by actually the tilling the fertilized ground in which I actually occupy. And if I radio in to really understand that if I can take care of my Harlem, my block, which is 125th and 5th Avenue, if I first can take care of that, make sure that's taken care of, then I can have a conversation about expanding it potentially to 10 block radius, both sides. Then I can have a conversation maybe talking about Harlem. And then I might just want to end right there, right? I might just want to say, let me just take care of Harlem. And what does it mean to make sure Harlem is taken care of for this moment? And if I just do that, the kind of fertilizer that will create as a pastor of a church I attend, First Corinthian Baptist Church, will create the launching pad of ideas, because I don't need to hold America. I need to hold my neighborhood. I need to hold the little bit that I can handle, because when I start to think about America, I get overwhelmed and I want to shut down and I will turn the Zoom off and we are done, right? But if I think about my corner, my little piece of land that is abundantly fertile with possibility, I can till and make something magical happen. And that in that tilling, I can feed more, because it's not about to what Stephanie said so beautifully. Not solely about me creating the solution. It's about me creating the little bit of access with a little bit of stride that I have, and hopefully it inspires the foundation for more ripples to happen. How can I be the butterfly to my own revolution? I don't have to be the revolution. I can be the butterfly to the revolution. That just means flapping my wings as the butterfly does, just to say, I'm a flap, I'm a flap, I'm a flap. And what does it do? It creates change, shift, wind, force. And that's a singular act by a singular insect that doesn't know that it's necessary flapping and what it's doing, but it's intentional about how it's doing it.
That's the key, what Jonathan just said. The thing of what's next, incidentally, right after this, well, not right after this, at 7 o'clock, our sort of civic conversation series for Baltimore Center Stage, which is called, wait for it, the Butterfly Sessions, intentionally, because of what this exact same thing is taking place tonight at 7, and it's all pride all the time, because the first Pride was a riot, or so I'm told. But the thing that Jonathan is saying about focus on the small, because right, Miss Adrienne Marie Brown says, and Octavia Butler, small is all. What you are at the small is what you are at the big. And what I hope is next for the American theater is the understanding that our systems with which we operate, the systems we lean on to make work, those are the same systems that ripple up and create the conditions for the state murdering unarmed citizens in the street. They are linked directly. When we talk about the systems of our sort of the way we pay our staff and our artists, who we pay, where the economic power goes, those are the same systems that map up to economic inequality, economic oppression. And even when we talk about the healthcare systems that we perpetuate with inside of our institutions, inside of our unions, those are the same systems that map up to the disparity of healthcare and disproportionate lack of access to healthcare that Black and Brown folks experience all over the country. So the extent to which the American theater understands that stuff that's happening out in our streets is happening, there's a version of it happening in our very own building, that's the extent to which the American theater might have a shot at fulfilling, at being the best version of itself. And what Jonathan is talking about with like, I'm gonna take care of my block. I think that the sort of corollary for our theaters is, I'm going to take my piece of land, whether it's spiritual or physical land, and do deep sort of reflection and understanding of how I came to be there, and who has access to it, and what I am doing, me Stephanie as a person, but more importantly me Stephanie as the leader of an institution, what I'm doing to perpetuate systemic oppression and anti-Blackness and uphold white supremacy, because I promise I am. But I'm not gonna, if I'm not willing to look for it, that's the key. You gotta be willing to look for it. You have to be looking for it and know it when you see it. And then, only then, can you actually affect the change. Small change, and it has huge effects.
I want to jump in here before Pirronne, as just to say to our audience that if anyone has any questions, please now is the time as I'm saying these words and as Pirronne adds her piece to the conversation, to throw questions into our Q&A. If you're on Facebook, you can throw them into the comments and we'll bring them into the Zoom so that we can close out with some questions from the audience. But before we move on to Pirronne, I just want to say really quickly, such beautiful things have been said, and to echo Stephanie, what you said about you reckoning with the, like, what do people need? What is the need, and what is the thing that I can do to address it? And Jonathan, what you said about how NBT has always been about what is the need? It was the need for this oasis, for Black people to create theater, to have their own space. I really feel that the Open Your Lobby, at least at the workshop, started because I've been an abolitionist for like 2 years, a prison and police abolitionist, because I follow the works of this amazing woman named Mariame Kaba, who is an organizer and abolitionist and a scholar. And she has this saying that's like, community organizing is about addressing need. And there is always something you can do where you are to address someone's need. And if you focus on the actionable thing that you can actually do wherever you are to find out what someone's needs are and address them, that will have, as we've all said now many times, have huge ramifications. And a metaphor that, well, one thing that I like to say is that you will, especially when it comes to white and non-Black people of color and participating in white supremacy, you will always be a part of the problem because you were born into being part of the problem, but you can choose to be part of the solution. Like you will always make mistakes. You'll always have learned biases that you can spend your whole life unlearning, and things you'll probably still fuck up sometimes. But you can make the active choice to say, okay, that's all on me, and I'm going to add something to the world or add something to what's happening, and make the choice to also contribute. Okay, Pirronne, sorry for that intermission. Now, please, whatever you're going to add.
I mean, I think I have I have similar, and then I guess just a different experience just being at Geva, which is a predominantly white institution, and not being in a position of influence, but not of ultimate power, as the associate artistic director. But I mean, first, I really just want to start with myself, right? And I've been kind of going through my production history in my head, and thinking about where I failed Black artists, where I thought I was holding space for them, or creating a safe environment and failing, where I colluded with white feminism, and accepted that, given the scarcity model that I was conditioned with, that I was going to be the only one in the room, and that was okay, the only BIPOC woman in the room, and that white feminism is just a pit stop towards white supremacy. It's not, it's a subset, it's part of it. So I've been really doing a lot of deep reflection on my own work, and where anti-Blackness has shown up, where my collusion with white supremacy has shown up. And I think it's really important that non-Black POCs are doing this work and talking about it and modeling it, because I think it furthers that the fact that it's not us against white people, it's all of us against white supremacy. And that we've all, as a non-Black POC, I with light skin privilege and ethnically ambiguous privilege, whatever the hell that means, I have benefited from it. And I think that was also that I've been on this journey of awakening to the power for social change that exists in being even a freelance director, because you are an employer. And that who I hire as designers, as actors, advocating for an intimacy director, advocating for inclusion on all fronts, and also advocating for the kinds of stories that you want to tell. That is a civic duty. And that is not just about one's own artistic preferences or aesthetic. I can think that a play has a really cool theatrical form, but if it's racist, I'm not going to direct it, right? And developing a better nose for that, I think, and that goes with, I think, continued anti-racist training. And I feel like it's kind of like trying to improve your own eyesight for where your bias shows up, you know, like, and that like, if you were maybe once like not able, and maybe that's ableist, but you know, that like, I'm trying to make sure that I see more, clock more about what I collude with. And what I participate in. And I mean, as far as the organization, you know, we met for 2.5 hours this morning talking about, at my request, talking about listing off the manifestations of white supremacy in the organization as a thought exercise to make it visible to people who haven't really thought about it. I'm the only BIPOC person on the senior staff, first ever, actually. And so, but I also feel like in this moment, I need to reposition myself, not as the expert or the teacher, because I've colluded too. I've upheld it too. I have work to do too. And if I position myself to teach everyone else, then I'm going to limit my own learning and my own self-reflection, and do a kind of emotional labor that is really taxing, but will also limit my own growth and development into the anti-racist artist that I want to be, right? And the continued work towards refining that. So, so where we go from here, I think is like really I think the most fundamental thing for predominantly white organizations who haven't been on this journey until now is not to think of this as one of the things we're doing, but the work from which all work is born. That like, there is no like, we'll do anti-racism and then we'll do season planning. You know what I mean? It's like, we'll do our anti-racism training and that will be the foundation and the context from which we talk about work and artists and representation and the stories that we want to see. And to think of that from the lens of, as you said, civic engagement, which is right as the term, thank you, as opposed to thinking about that as a tokenized accessory to the white supremacist work that we produce.
Thank you. Sorry, Trey, did you have something to say?
No, you go ahead.
Okay. I had a thought and it quickly left my brain. I guess I'm just so enamored by this term civic engagement that we've certainly are not the first people to ever use or think of before, but I think it speaks to this idea that I think like American culture for a large period of the last few decades sort of like oriented itself towards don't talk about politics, and if you're not a politician, you shouldn't be public with your politics. And like I know like it's different. It's a little bit different now, but I feel like 5 years ago, or especially around the election of the current president, a lot of people who were previously silent, who were previously kept their politics to themselves, started using their platforms and started to speak up, and that was a big culture shift. And I think theaters are now starting to understand too that you know, not participating in politics is a political act also. There's you know, we whether you like it or not, we all are in community with each other, and we all have a responsibility. And some people have known that for a long time and have been doing that work for decades and decades and decades. And some people are just waking up to that. And that's not really a question that I'm posing or anything. It's just an observation. Jonathan, I think you had something to say.
Oh, I wanted to jump in on the word politics as it gets used in this space, because I've experienced this many years, many years, that I think you're right, Declan, that that our political leanings we're more likely to name them explicitly. I just want to be careful that we don't equate politics, like capital P politics, as in partisan, Democrat, Republican, etc., like whatever your flavor of capital P politics is, with the act of caring for and stewarding and protecting and nurturing bodies and identities that are politicized.
Totally.
And
yeah, thank you.
The idea that, like, the number of times that I think we get told, or that I've been told, you know, that it's just like once you put Black bodies on stage, or once you put brown bodies on, you know, that's a political statement. It feels like reframing that is important. And then also this moment that we're in with all of the sort of civic unrest and the uprisings and the protests, the framing of that as political, I find tricky, because yes, there are policies, actual political like policies that we need to wrestle with, and you can be for or against, what have you. But can't we all agree that racism is a human rights issue? Can we all agree that it's a healthcare issue? You know, can we all agree that it is not capital P politics, that is not a Democratic issue or a Republican issue in that way? So those are even that vocabulary, I feel like it feels incendiary. It feels dismissive of the human rights violations that are actually happening in our streets.
Thank you. What a wonderful clarification. We're at 6 o'clock, and so I do want to honor everyone's time. Do we have any closing thoughts or remarks that we'd like to leave us off with?
I mean, I would just say that as we venture into what is technically, I think, week 12 of quarantine, and a monumental and catalytic and unprecedented energy of who we are as humans in America, and coming to terms and face with who we are, that we actively, in an active way, give ourselves the space to be really uncomfortable and not the space to find solutions so quickly. That we live in the discomfort of what this moment is, so that we can learn how to unlearn the tools that can easily recreate this with another name, with another form of oppression, with another incident. And that this reckoning that's happened, and whoever orchestrated it, universe, whatever you might believe in, with COVID-19 and with the murders that have happened, onslaught, and also the protests that's happened, it is an energy of rebirth. It is a chaos that creates harmony, right? But that chaos is uncomfortable, and we're so used to solution building. And I invite us to maybe take a pause before we make that solution declaration, that we say, have I lived uncomfortable just a little bit? Have I lived uncomfortable enough? Do I feel, and not from a space where you can't breathe or you can't move or you can't do anything, but where you actually get free, where you get free from the actual conflict of itself. And I just think that's where the pause comes into play. It's an active choice to say, this is uncomfortable, this doesn't feel good, but I will live inside this uncomfortability for as long as possible, because there's a group of people who've been uncomfortable forever, and I've been living in comfort. So for this moment, I get to not walk in their shoes, but be an empathetic human to understand the kind of growth that is necessary in order for systemic change to happen, which can be revolutionary, meaning that it could be a total burning the whole shit down, Or it can be, I'm gonna take a step. And a step is just as profound as we're burning the whole shit down. Sorry for cursing.
I want to close, my closing thought, I think, will be in response to, somebody is vacuuming above me. I don't know if you can hear it, but I apologize. That's the question that came over. What are some butterfly moments that you've seen develop over the past 10 years as the conversation about anti-racism in theater has evolved? And I just wanted to offer that my butterfly moment was even like we're hearing a lot about anti-racism training, where the anti-racism is in the lexicon and the zeitgeist now, that in a way that it wasn't even 5 minutes ago. And my butterfly moment was however many years ago it was that my best friend, my best friend turned to me and said, I think that we need to take anti-racist training, and we're going to go to the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. I signed us up, we're going in February. Just one person to another person, then to two more friends, then to a group of people. And then each one of us were using that language inside of our respective institutions to varying degrees of success, but we were using the language nonetheless. And so that very tiny moment, I think, has rippled and happily continues to ripple. But it started with literally Roberta turning to me in Joe's Pub that one night being like, I think we got to do this.
And it's because I heard about it from you and Jacob Pirronne that then I brought that to Geva, and it looks like it is finally a priority, which is exciting, you know. I also just wanted to say that sometimes I feel like, and I just want to recognize this, that like talking about what the American theater needs to do, I think it's important to recognize that BIPOC theaters have been doing what a lot of these large white institutions are getting hip to right now in terms of civic engagement, in terms of serving communities and thinking about one's work as an act of public service and listening to communities to understand what those needs are instead of imposing a set of assumptions of what those needs are. And I think that we have had too long in the American theater an assumption that bigger is better, and that and a false idea, I think, of cachet and of like, I sort of feel like our idea of a great career is kind of being decolonized right now, which is like really exciting to me. Because like, I think that this is a moment for folks to, like, folks running the big, like, juggernaut institutions to sit down with and pay for their consultation the folks running National Black Theater, the folks running North Theater, Golden Thread, these organizations that stayed small deliberately in some cases, and in some cases are small because of what we choose to fund in America, and learn about decades of civic engagement that they are now only beginning, and to position themselves as the student in those conversations, to learn about what is a rich history in this country of civic engagement through theater that we have ignored because it does not center whiteness.
Wow. Well, thank you all for taking time out of your day to chat with us. I feel like I've gained so much from the experience, and it's very inspiring to hear all of you talk. I really, what Stephanie said about her friend turning to her and just saying, we should do this thing. I think that's how awareness spreads. That's how protest and change continues to happen. And this is my reminder to everyone to register to vote, fill out the census, tell your friends, and power to the people.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie and Pirronne and Jonathan. Thank you, Declan and Tramane. This was such a beautiful conversation. I'm so appreciative and grateful for it. You can find, just to close out, you can find a list of upcoming programming at nytw.org. We're going to drop a survey in the chat. We love to hear how we're doing. Any thoughts that you have, thank you. We are so appreciative. And to close, we just want to highlight some organizations in the community who are on the ground right now fighting for Black lives and social justice. If you can make a donation, please do. If you can't make a donation, we encourage you to join us in action through healing, education, protest, petition. We're dropping the resources into the chat as well. Thank you again so much to everybody who's on the Zoom with me. Take care, everybody, and we look forward to being with you in community again soon.
Thank you all so much, really.